The scaffold stood silent. Straw scattered across cold stone. The May air carried the scent of rain and fear. A woman with dark eyes knelt before the crowd. Her skirt spread like blood on the ground. Anne Boleyn, once Queen of England, now faced the sword. Her lips moved in prayer, but her eyes flickered with fire. She had risen higher than any courtier's daughter could dream, and now she would fall lower than any queen before her. Beyond the tower walls, whispers spread that her sister Mary had once shared the same king's bed. Some said Anne stole the crown from Catherine. Some said Mary had given her body only to be discarded. But the truth of the Boleyn sisters lay somewhere between desire, ambition, and ruin. Sisters bound by blood, divided by a man who could take whatever he pleased. Their fates shaped a kingdom and left scars that lasted centuries. The story of the Boleyn sisters begins in a quieter place, far from the roar of London. At Hever Castle in Kent, the daughters of Thomas Boleyn grew up in privilege, but not in royalty. Their father was ambitious, a man of languages and diplomacy, who saw his children as tools to sharpen for courtly use. Anne and Mary were educated beyond the expectation for most women. They learned music, dance, languages, and the art of charm. But even in youth, Anne stood apart. Sharp-minded, quick-tongued, she had a fire that caught notice. Mary, softer, gentler, seemed less destined for greatness. Few could know how violently fortune would twist both of their lives. Anne's first taste of the wider world came when she was sent across the Channel to the court of Margaret of Austria. It was the most polished court in Europe, a place of refinement and intrigue. There Anne learned grace, learned how women wielded power without crowns. She absorbed French manners, French fashion, French wit. The girl from Kent began to carry herself like nobility. She would never shed the elegance of those years. Mary's path was different. She was left behind, stitching embroidery, her fate tied to quieter pursuits until chance carried her abroad. When the sisters served at the glittering French court, their destinies began to diverge. France was a place of art and lust, where kings took what they wished. Mary caught the eye of Francois, a king as notorious as Henry for his appetites. Whispers said she was his mistress, though whether she chose or was commanded, no one can know. She returned to England with a shadow over her name, already marked as a woman who had yielded. Anne remained in France, soaking in the world of cultivated power, studying queens and noblewomen who bent men's desires to their own survival. The contrast between them had begun. Back in England, Mary's beauty caught another set of royal eyes. King Henry VIII soon drew her into his orbit. Their affair began quietly, as his often did. Historians cannot say if Mary was willing, or if refusal was ever an option. At Henry's court, a woman's virtue was fragile, her fate dictated by a glance from the throne. Mary became his mistress, and some believed she bore him children, though he never claimed them. For Henry, she was another flame to burn through. For Mary, it was the beginning of her eclipse. Anne returned to England transformed, no longer a court girl, but a woman who carried the confidence of Europe. She stepped into the same palace halls where her sister's reputation waned. Unlike Mary, she did not yield easily to Henry's advances. She drew him close and held him away, a dance of temptation and denial that consumed the king. What Mary had given, Anne withheld. Where Mary had been pliant, Anne was unyielding. It made all the difference. Henry's passion for Anne was not simple lust. It became an obsession that bent the kingdom. Catherine of Aragon, his queen of 20 years, could give him no son. Anne convinced him she could. But to marry her, he had to tear England from Rome. What began as desire for a woman became a revolution in faith and power. While Mary faded into the background, Anne ascended higher and higher until she was queen. Yet the crown she won was cursed from the beginning. At her coronation, the people jeered. Catherine had been loved. Anne was despised. When she bore Henry a daughter instead of a son, the king's joy curdled into disappointment. That daughter, Elizabeth, would one day rule England as one of its greatest monarchs. But in 1533, she was only a disappointment in swaddling clothes. Anne's miscarriages followed, each one cutting deeper into Henry's patience. The same fire that had lured him now burned too fiercely. She quarreled with him, defied him, shamed him in front of courtiers. He turned cold. He turned elsewhere. Mary, meanwhile, had made a scandal of her own. She secretly married a common soldier, William Stafford, for love. At a time when women were pawns for family alliances, Mary chose her heart over her bloodline. For this, she was cast out, banished from court, stripped of support. Anne, now queen, refused to forgive her. The bond of sisterhood was broken, never to be mended. Anne's enemies grew bold. Thomas Cromwell, once her ally, now turned against her. He spread whispers of adultery and incest. Men of her household were accused of bedding her, even her own brother George. The charges were grotesque, the evidence thin. But in Henry's court, truth mattered less than convenience. In May 1536, Anne was arrested and dragged to the Tower. The girl who had once studied under queens in France now awaited her death. Her trial was swift, her fate sealed before it began. On the morning of her execution, she spoke calmly, praising the king who had condemned her. Her composure unsettled those who watched. Then the French swordsman stepped forward. With one stroke, Anne Boleyn's head fell, and the Tower of London claimed another soul. Mary outlived her sister, but in obscurity. She died years later, away from court, her grave unknown. Her children carried her blood into noble lines, and through them, her legacy continued. Anne's daughter Elizabeth would rise to a throne stained by her mother's death, ruling for 44 years. The sisters, so different, had together shaped the course of England. Their story is one of ambition and survival, of love and betrayal, of how two women from the same house were torn apart by a king's desire. One crowned and destroyed, the other discarded yet free. The shadow of their lives stretches still across the centuries. The king's passion for Anne Boleyn was not born in a single night. It grew in silence, in letters sealed with longing, in jewels pressed into her hands. He had taken many lovers before, but none like her. When Anne retreated from court to Hever Castle, Henry pursued her like a hunter chasing prey. He wrote desperate words, pleading for her presence, swearing that without her his life was sorrow. But Anne did not yield. She demanded not to be a mistress, but a wife. To a man like Henry, used to obedience, her refusal was intoxicating. In truth, her resistance was both shield and weapon. Anne had watched her sister's downfall. She knew Mary had been taken, used, and cast aside. That was not the fate she intended. She would not be another forgotten mistress, discarded for the next beauty who crossed the king's path. She would be queen, or she would be nothing. And so Henry fought for her, not with sword or lance, but with parchment, courts, and clerics. For Anne Boleyn, he defied the Pope. The battle for annulment consumed years. Catherine of Aragon refused to yield her crown. Rome stood firm, unwilling to bend before England's king. In this struggle, Henry broke the bonds of centuries. He cast down papal authority, declaring himself the supreme head of the English Church. He tore monasteries apart, stripping their wealth. He changed the fate of a kingdom forever, all to make Anne his wife. Few women in history have inspired such a transformation. Few have paid so dearly for it. When Anne entered London as queen, the river was crowded with barges, the streets with pageants. Gold cloth, trumpets, and banners heralded her triumph. Yet beneath the spectacle, the people muttered. They called her usurper, concubine, witch. Their beloved Catherine had been cast aside, and no coronation could erase that grievance. Anne wore her crown, but it rested on fragile ground. In September 1533, she gave birth. All awaited a prince. Bells rang as the child was announced, but joy turned to silence when the infant was revealed to be a girl. Elizabeth. Healthy, fierce, but not the son Henry demanded. In that moment, Anne's victory cracked. The years ahead would be filled with tension, with fleeting hope followed by bitter disappointment. She suffered miscarriage after miscarriage, each one a nail driven deeper into her marriage. Henry's gaze began to wander. Other women caught his eye, and Anne's fury flared. She did not suffer in silence. She fought him with words, accused him before courtiers, stood unbent. But a queen's strength could also be her undoing. Henry, who once worshipped her defiance, now found it intolerable. In her sharpness he saw not charm, but challenge. His obsession cooled into resentment. It was then that her enemies moved. Thomas Cromwell, architect of the break with Rome, had once stood beside her. But power shifts swiftly in court. Anne opposed his hunger to seize the wealth of monasteries for the crown. She spoke against him, questioned his schemes, and in doing so, sealed her doom. Cromwell was not a man to forgive. He saw her fall as necessary for his survival. The charges he wove were grotesque. Anne accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George. The idea was monstrous, yet it gave Henry a story to tell himself, to justify the end of the woman he once adored. The courtiers whispered of her liaisons. None could be proven. Confessions wrung from terror and threats became the thread of a noose. On the 2nd of May 1536, Anne was arrested. She was brought to the Tower of London, the same fortress that had once welcomed her as a queen. The same stone walls that had echoed with her triumph now closed upon her like a tomb. At first she raved, bewildered at the accusations, laughing at their absurdity. Then came silence, then prayers. Those who saw her said she bore herself with strange calm, as if already half departed from this world. Her trial was no trial at all. Presided over by her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, it was a spectacle designed to condemn. The jurors were men with everything to gain from her ruin. Her defense mattered little. She was guilty before she entered the hall. The sentence was death, not by axe but by sword. Henry had granted her that final gesture, a swift end from a French executioner. The morning of her execution was clear. She walked to the scaffold. Her steps were steady, her words measured. She praised the king, thanked those who had been kind, spoke no curse. Then she knelt, tucking her skirts about her. A single stroke of the sword severed her head. A gasp rippled through the crowd. In an instant the queen was gone, and the tower swallowed her remains. Mary Boleyn, once Henry's mistress, once Anne's shadow, lived on. She did not share her sister's glory, nor her sister's destruction. Banished from court, she dwelled in obscurity, raising her children, bound to the man she had chosen for love. History turned its gaze away from her, yet through her descendants the Boleyn bloodline continued, woven into the veins of England's future rulers. The sisters had been raised in the same halls, taught the same lessons, daughters of the same house. Yet their fates diverged like 2 rivers, one raging toward a fatal fall, the other winding into quiet fields. Anne reached for a crown and lost her life. Mary reached for love and lost her place. Between them stood Henry VIII, their judge, their ruin, their king. What remains is not just the tragedy of 2 women, but the reshaping of a nation. The Boleyn sisters, one remembered, one nearly forgotten, altered the course of England forever. The year 1536 ended with a crown buried and a new queen rising. Henry VIII married Jane Seymour within days of Anne's execution, eager to secure the son that had eluded him for decades. Mary Boleyn, far from court, must have watched the storm from a distance. Her sister's fall had been swift, brutal, final. The family name was stained. The Boleyns, who once stood higher than any court faction, were broken. George Boleyn had died beside Anne, condemned by the same poisoned whispers. Their father Thomas, who had spent a lifetime climbing through diplomacy and cunning, bowed his head in disgrace. Only Mary remained, quiet and forgotten, her life spared by obscurity. Anne's daughter Elizabeth was stripped of legitimacy, declared a bastard. She was set aside with her half-sister Mary, Catherine of Aragon's child. The kingdom had its new queen, but unease rippled beneath the surface. The blood spilled for Anne's crown had not ended doubt. Henry had torn England from Rome, dissolved monasteries, seized wealth, and yet his throne rested on fragile foundations. Elizabeth's mother was gone, but the child lived, carrying in her veins the destiny her parents had fought and died for. In time, Elizabeth would become one of the greatest monarchs England had ever known, though she grew up under the shadow of her mother's execution. It was said she rarely spoke of Anne. Perhaps the memory was too sharp, or perhaps she understood that to invoke her mother's name was to invoke treason. Yet when Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558, the daughter of the condemned queen, fulfilled the dream for which Anne had risked everything. The girl who had once been branded unwanted would reign for 44 years. Mary's fate was quieter. She lived with her husband William Stafford until her death in 1543. She left behind children whose descendants wove into the tapestry of English nobility. Through them, her bloodline endured, reaching across centuries until it flowed into the modern royal house. Mary had not seized crowns, nor broken kingdoms, yet her legacy was carried silently through generations. The contrast between the sisters is haunting. Anne's life blazed like fire, dazzling and dangerous, consuming all around her until it left only ashes. Mary's life moved like water, slipping beneath notice, surviving where flame could not. Both were shaped by the will of one man, yet each chose differently. Anne chose ambition, Mary chose love. Both choices demanded sacrifice. Whispers of witchcraft followed Anne even after death. Some said she had bewitched Henry, that her black eyes held unnatural power. It was court gossip, nothing more. What cannot be disputed is that she was a woman who defied the order of her time. In an age where queens were meant to be silent consorts, she spoke, argued, and pressed her will. That defiance became her strength, and then her downfall. Mary, though dismissed as weak or foolish by many, showed a different kind of defiance. She married without permission. She chose her own path, and though it cost her everything at court, it granted her peace in her final years. The sisters' lives mirror the peril of women in Tudor England. To be noticed by the king was to be lifted beyond imagination, but also to stand on the edge of ruin. Beauty and wit were weapons, but also snares. For Anne and Mary, the glitter of the court was both promise and curse. They danced through halls of power where every glance could wound, where every smile hid ambition, where every whisper might be the beginning of death. Their story is not simply of rivalry or seduction. It is the story of a kingdom in upheaval. The Boleyn sisters were threads woven into the greater tapestry of the English Reformation, into the rise and fall of dynasties, into the shaping of monarchy itself. Without them, Henry's break with Rome might never have come. Without them, Elizabeth I might never have ruled. And yet, when stripped of crowns and titles, they were still only two sisters. Bound by blood, divided by fate. Anne died beneath the blade, her body laid in an unmarked grave within the Tower. Mary died in a quiet house, her final resting place lost to time. One remembered in fire, the other forgotten in shadow. Both carried into history by the choices of a single man and the courage of their own. The tower where Anne died still stands. Its stones hold the echo of her final prayer, the hush before the sword struck. Hever Castle still stands too, its gardens a quieter witness, where Mary once walked far from the roar of London. Between these places lies the truth of the Boleyn sisters, triumph and tragedy, fire and water, crown and exile. Their story lingers not because they were flawless, but because they were human, caught in the storm of power. And so we ask, were they victims of history or architects of it?